Hi there, Keith again from the Evangelical Free Church, Stony Stratford. And we're continuing in our series on the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're now in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And Solomon at this point really continues where he left off the other day when we were looking at this. In chapter 3, he said this: I saw something else under the sun. In a place of judgment, wickedness was there. In a place of justice, wickedness was there. Solomon's, in a sense, has put on the hat of a commoner. He's taking a good long look at authority in some ways which he is part of. And, well, you know, even if he's a good ruler, those below him perhaps aren't doing the job. There's corruption all around. And when we get to the start of chapter 4, we read this: Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed. They have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they had no comforter. I declared that the dead who had already died are happy in the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet seen evil that is done under the sun. It's an age-old theme, really. One of my favourite Shakespearean plays is Hamlet. And it's very notable that quite early in the play, Hamlet notes that there is something rotten in the state of Denmark. And in his troubled mind and in his confusion, at one point he just really sort of weighs up the options, and we get that very famous speech: to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to take up arms against a sea of trouble, or by opposing them, end them. What's it going to be? The intellectual approach, or is it going to be literally rebellion? Hamlet, in his troubled state, is weighing up both. And in the end, he thinks that, a bit like Solomon, perhaps it's better to not have been born. Perhaps it's better to die. Because he says this: to sleep and to say we end the 1,000 natural shocks that the flesh is heir to. Better to have not been born. Better to have already died. Solomon then moves on. Justice, who can find it? Depends on who you've got as a judge, perhaps. But is there something else one can do? He returns to another theme, the theme of work. But even there, he sees that there's a problem with it. Work is good. We know that. We saw that back in chapter 3 and verse 13. But it doesn't always pay off, does it? Verse 4, I saw that all the labour and all the achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbour. This too is meaningless, a chasing after wind. It's really a case, isn't it, to take the old phrase, of keeping up with the Joneses. Is that the meaning? Does that give purpose to life? Well, Solomon uses that familiar phrase. It's chasing after wind. And of course, Hebrew, the word is hebel, vapor. It's like chasing after something that you can't even get hold of. Well, how depressing is that? Well, how about other ways? What about doing nothing? The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. That doesn't seem a very good idea, does it? Well, what about moderation? Verse 6, better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Do you know, I don't know about you, but I've never actually heard someone say, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. You see, work in the end, well, we get to the familiar theme that we see in Ecclesiastes: death is a great leveller. Verse 7, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked. Why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is a meaningless and miserable business. Here's a guy, he's toiling away, but where's it going to get him? What does he take with him in the end? Well, the issue is not very much. He's not content with what he sees. And a millionaire was once asked, I think it was Rockefeller, he was once asked, how much money do you need? He was very wealthy. His answer was very telling. $1 more than I've already got. Not content, toiling away. Why is he doing it? Because the theme of Ecclesiastes have been, you can't take it with you. Well, Solomon at this point decides that he will look at a better way. Verse 9, 2 are better than 1 because they have good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Better to do things with people. Better to have a partnership, like marriage. I know I depend greatly on my good wife, Tracy. And I remember when I was a builder, I used to do jobs with a dear friend, a guy I still know who's still in the building trade, a guy called Neil. And it was true, there was much more return, wasn't there, when 2 of you were doing it. One could get on with one job, one could get on with another thing, and productively you seem to go twice as fast as you do when you're doing it all on your own. Well, Solomon concludes this chapter with a little parable. And it's an interesting one. Wisdom has value, but remember that it's wisdom that has value, nothing else. Verse 13, better a poor but wise youth than an old foolish king who no longer knows how to take warning. The youth may have come from prison to kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. There's probably 2 ways to take this parable. One is having the wisdom to become or get to a place of advancement, in this case king. We have this poor youth, he becomes a king, but then he rather forgets his wisdom. Or it's a contrast between the poor youth, maybe even in prison, who has wisdom, and a king or someone who usurps a kingdom, and then basically in the end people get fed up with him and usurp him. 2 illustrations of this, where wisdom, if it's ignored, can fail. Oliver Cromwell, whatever you think of him, was a guy who was wise. He realised what people were like. And after he became Lord Protector, at one time he was with at some parliamentary event, and the guy with him said, listen to the cheering crowds. In other words, look at this. You're really seen as a good leader. You're really seen as popular. Oliver Cromwell was too astute for that. He said they would cheer just as loudly if you or I were going to be hanged. First example. Second one, a modern one. The Spice Girls had huge success with their first 2 albums. Then they ditched their management and their 3rd album was very, very poorly received. The point was this: whatever they thought of their management had a far better idea of what the public wanted from the Spice Girls. The Spice Girls, the group themselves, did not. And that was reflected in a poor selling 3rd album. You see, Solomon concludes that good things, even good things like wisdom, can be corrupted by the human condition. He also concludes this, and I think this is notable, and this is perhaps a key to the chapter. Don't worship the created. Don't live for things. As I said, you can't take them with you. Whatever you achieve, whatever you're seen to achieve, whatever wisdom you seem to have had. I'll give an example. Whether my ministry has seemed to be good, bad, or successful, it won't matter much when I'm in the grave, will it? What's more important is this: to look at the world and to look to the one who makes a difference in the world. Because Solomon's been quite blunt, we can't. Wisdom will get you so far, but in the end, there'll be failure. You can't take it with you, whether it's your wisdom, your legacy, your possessions. So we're really at this point guided to the words of Jesus. And these are some words that Jesus said shortly before he went to his death, shortly before he goes to the cross to pay for your and my sins. He says to his disciples, "I have told you these things so that in me you will have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." All our small concerns, all our worries, Christ has overcome that. We don't need to be bound by that. And the Apostle John takes this teaching and he applies it to early Christians in the early church that he's writing to. He says this: "For everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is victory that has overcome the world, even faith. Who is it that overcomes the world? Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God." Only in Jesus can there actually be forgiveness for sin. Only in Jesus can there be forgiveness for going our own way, for trying to take the things of the world with us, literally becoming a slave and worshipping the things of the world. Jesus can free us from all that. Thank you again for listening.